National Women's Rights Convention Changed History
by Adriel Lopez
and Courtney Kadask. The National Women's Rights Convention began around the year of 1848 and was held in Seneca Falls, New York. Seneca Falls represents the day the convention was held. The location, which is named Women's Rights National Historical Park, informs and represents the story and time of how women had gained their rights. At Seneca Falls was where the National Women's Rights Convention took place. The National Women's Rights Convention introduced a passage of laws that were essentially made for women, giving women rights and balancing their freedom. During the Seneca Falls Convention, which was held on July 19 to the 20th of 1848, the women's suffrage movement was launched in the United States. The two feminine leaders, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, were unfortunately excluded from being able to participate in the convention, which circled around their determination of solving for women's struggles. The convention holds a significant impact on the freedom that women have today, that include having the right to vote in elections. Speeches were presented on the subject of equal wages, enlarged education, career opportunities, and so on. It is important that women should educate themselves about how they gain their rights and what they fought for to be able to get them, because the convention is now known as an important turning event in history.
The female leaders who thought the idea of getting women's rights were both Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. They met in London and thought to each other, what if we could solve the equality between women and men, and women would finally get the rights that they deserved?
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was furious about the exclusion of women at the proceedings. Both Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton vowed to call a women's rights convention. The National Women's Rights Movement was largely based in the United States, which saw equal rights, better opportunities, and expanded freedom for women. On Elizabeth Cady's honeymoon in London, she attended a World Anti-Slavery Convention, where she met Lucretia Mott, who had a similar situation to her. On July 9th of 1848, 5 women met in New York, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Mary Ann McClintock joined Jane Hunt in the preparations of the first Women's Rights Convention.
What this will introduce is how and where the convention even came to mind. The origin story of how the National Women's Rights Convention started all happened in London. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott both met in London in the year of 1840. Since both their husbands decided to make an appearance at the World Anti-Slavery Convention and they wanted to accompany them, they wanted to make a solution that would give the women the right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott wanted to secure equality with both men and women. Although, the problem was that the convention didn't allow women, so that's when they came to the conclusion to make the Women's Rights Convention. Although the problem was that the convention didn't allow women, so that's when they came to the conclusion to create the Women's Rights Convention. Since the convention didn't allow women to enter, they were excluded even though the whole point and thought of the event was Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. If the convention was secured and women finally got equality with men, women could finally enter the convention and they would do anything that men wouldn't allow them to.
People will go in one direction or another out of this debate. Men and women, black and white.
Since women have the rights to do anything just like men, there can be multiple ways of demonstrating how the National Women's Rights Convention is known as a huge point in history. Before the convention, women wouldn't be treated equally. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton finally wanted to make an end to this. There are multiple ways of describing what makes the National Women's Rights Convention seem so important in history. Seeing as to how women have always been treated unfairly ever since the beginning of time, with the explanations and experiences that were introduced regarding equal wages, expanded education, and career opportunities, women's property rights, marriage reform, and temperance. Thankfully, it was being reconsidered and debated. Therefore, the National Women's Rights Convention also became an extremely famous and remarkable event in women's rights history.
Before having the event held and approved, they had to hold a convention, or in other words, assembly people would meet for a common purpose. In this case, the common purpose was inequality between men and women. Based on what was shown in the primary resource, in order to make it all official, they first needed to have the National Women's Rights Convention. But it was Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the McClintock family that wrote everything. But they came to the decision that it should be called the Declaration of Settlements. An estimated number of around 300 men and women had turned up at the convention. Even Lucretia Mott and Frederick Douglass had presented themselves at the convention. Except only 68 women and 32 men signed the Declaration of Settlements. Even after 70 years since the signing, the nation ratified the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote in 1920.
The event's organization team hoped to create a national organization, as well as a plan that would contain action to make a famous movement. Lucy Stone is known as one of the many speakers who proclaimed for equal liberation of imprisonment from slavery for women. The convention passed 12 resolutions and was originally designed to acquire specific rights and privileges that the women in the era didn't have. The convention served as a cornerstone of the women's suffrage movement. That ends up in the passage of the 19th Amendment, which happened in the year of 1920. Lucy Stone helped organize and achieve to set up the convention. It all happened in Worcester, Massachusetts. She was one of the many who delivered a speech about women's rights.
The National Women's Rights Convention has many names, but one of its multiple names is the Seneca Falls Convention. Basically, the Seneca Falls Convention is the same thing as the National Women's Rights Convention, just with a different name. Some people will call it the birthplace of American feminism. Also due to the fact that it was the first women's rights convention in America. Other than Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, there were a few more people who were also involved in the convention. People such as William Henry Canning, Paulina Wright Davis, Samuel J. May, and Lucy Stone also signed the call. The call discussed women's social, civil, and religious rights to secure women. Some other events that were similar to the convention were the suffragettes that are famous for being known for fighting for women's rights. Their peaceful movements and protests allowed for the nationwide right, which granted rights for women to vote in 1920. The National Women's Suffrage Association was founded by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. This happened in May of the year 1869. These two feminine women opposed the 15th Amendment because they were tired of women being excluded. The primary goal of the organization was to mainly achieve voting rights for women by means of a congressional amendment to the Constitution.
Not only were the actions inspiring and meaningful, but their words are as well. Two quotes from Elizabeth Cady Stanton: "Truth is the only safe ground to stand on," and "The moment we begin to fear the opinions of others and hesitate to tell the truth that is in us, and from motives of policy are silent when we should speak, the divine floods of light and life are no longer flow into our souls." Another two quotes from Lucretia Mott were, "The world has never yet seen a truly great and virtuous nation, because in the degradation of women, the very fountains of life are poisoned at their source," and learning while at school that the charge for education of girls was the same as for that boys, and that when they became teachers, women received only half as much as men for their services. The injustice of this distinction was so apparent. In conclusion, the National Women's Rights Convention was a huge turning point in history.
Now racism is sort of in a full-throated way part of the deliberation.